Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and pleasure to introduce our today's speaker at the Diplomatic Academy. It's David Menashri, an eminent political scientist from Israel, and not only this, but he is the first visiting professor of the Israel Institute in Vienna at the Diplomatic Academy. This academy has started a cooperation with the Israel Institute in Washington, and this cooperation includes that we have the honor to invite a professor from Israel. We asked when we started this cooperation that this should go beyond Israel, what we want to talk about. We want to talk about the region, we want to talk about how Israel sees global affairs, and I couldn't think about a better professor than David Menashri, who is the Israeli expert on Iran, before and after the revolution, I have to say, to have him here for a few months at the Diplomatic Academy. This talk will be moderated by our Professor for European Studies, who is himself an expert on European Middle East studies, Professor Patrick Müller, also welcome to you. And the topic that is chosen for this public lecture is Iran and Israel, why the mutual obsession? I'm a historian, and historians normally do not ask questions with a question mark at the end. But Professor Menashri is a political scientist. As a historian, I would have said, well, I don't understand. The mutual obsession is obvious for me because it's the Middle East. And secondly, because it's Israel. And thirdly, it's because it's Iran. But maybe there is a good reason for this. And maybe it has to do with the fact that there were much better times in the Israeli-Iranian relations. And from your biography, Professor Menashri, I know that you have been with a stipend from America, from the United States, for 2 years in Iran as a scholar, a young scholar, before 1979, so before the Iranian Revolution. So I guess what we're going to hear is also your personal experience with the topic that you have been working on for 50 years, or maybe even more than 50 years. A last sentence, let me say. I think you're the first Israeli who was ever invited in Vienna to talk about Iran. We are proud that we can offer such a talk and discussion here, and I much look forward to, and I welcome you all for tonight's discussion.
Yes, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to announce this talk, and maybe let me start with one quick observation. A music critic once said that it's impossible to really judge the impact from Beethoven because you judge Beethoven from a modern perspective and have been exposed to all the music that became after. And I think that one thing that Professor Menashri can really bring to us tonight is that he studies these relations since a very long time. And from a conversation with him, I know that right when he did his PhD research, he had the chance to conduct it in Iran at the time of the revolution. So he's somebody who's probably not falling in the trap to judge Israel-Iranian relations just from its contemporary state, but he has really a historical perspective to it. And on that note, I would already like to invite you to speak, and I think you will say a little bit of history, but also, of course, you talk about current issues that are very much on the agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brix, and thank you, Professor Müller. Also want to thank Mrs. Kepler-Schlesinger and all this nice staff, academic and administrative in the Academy. I've been to many universities, schools, and I think that an pleasant atmosphere that I found here, I didn't find almost nowhere else. But that's not the main point. I think what impressed me most in this, except in addition to the faculty, is the wonderful students that you have here. And I think that it's really very impressive to see the students who are so knowledgeable, at least from my experience of 1 month teaching. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. I also want to recognize the ambassador of the State of Israel, Mrs. Talia Lador Tersher, for being here. So I have 2 reasons to be careful in my talks today. One, it's being on record, and second, there is someone to report home. I'll do my best, though. And I'll not because of this, but because of my area of expertise that was mentioned here, I will focus mainly on Iran, which is an area that I studied, and I'll say a few words about the country which is my home, about Israel. Now, let me begin by saying one thing that I think it's important to put on the table. Iran is a very complex country. It's not black, it's not white. There are so many different colors in between. Iran has a wonderful civil society, probably most advanced than many other countries, certainly in the Middle East. There are women organizations, students organizations, newspapers being published in Iran are fascinating to read. If I read Persian, I read Arabic, and I compare, when the newspapers in Iran are allowed to be published. It's not all the time. So it doesn't mean that they have freedom of expression. It means that when they have freedom of expression, you see people expressing themselves in arts, in cinema industry, in fascinating women organizations, the most progressive, I think, in the Middle East. And there are periods, even under this regime, that it's more open. Newspapers are being published. I remember some, maybe in 2003 or something like that, they have a lecture in Israeli Foreign Ministry to the veterans of the Foreign Ministry, and I spoke about relative, under Khatami, relative openness in Iran, and someone told me how you can speak about relative openness when 100 liberal newspapers were shut down in 5 years. I say, here is the answer. Show me another country in the Middle East which has 100 liberal newspapers to shut them down. So we are living in this conflict between them and the forces of suppression. So Iran is a country that almost 40% of the people are minorities, ethnic minorities. It's very colorful. It has different ideologies. Even within the ruling elite, there are conflicts and power struggle. When I was speaking about this question of freedom with a friend of mine from one of the Iranian universities, how we can reconcile some signs from time to time of openness and brutal oppression, he told me, you know, David, they tell you that we don't have freedom of expression in Iran. That's not true. We have freedom of expression. What we don't have is freedom after expression. It is this kind of dichotomies that we live when we speak about Iran. I'll start at another point that for me it's important to put on the table. What makes me optimistic about Iran and Israel is that so far we did not have war with each other. No blood was shed on the borders between the countries that we don't have and don't share borders. And if you ask me, the two nations do not hate each other. In the collective memories of the Jews, Iran is a good country. One of our heroes is Cyrus the Great. It's the only king who is not Jewish that the Old Testament writes positively about him. You know, the Old Testament speaks ugly about many, many things. But when it comes to Cyrus the Great, he's the Messiah. And we used to have good relations with Iran for years and years. Iran was the closest ally of Israel before the revolution. So why I'm optimistic? Because I think that when you don't have this element of war between the two countries, it's easier one day, hopefully, to bridge this gap, which is today seems unbridgeable. Iran has gone through tremendous change in the last couple of generations, since the mid-20th century. And the best way to show this change and the dimensions of this change is the move from the monarchy of Mohammad Reza Shah to Ayatollah Khomeini and the Islamic Revolution. From a regime based on nationalism, the monarchy at the center, secularization, westernization, close relations with the United States and Israel, the new regime is doing exactly the opposite in any field. Islamization, republicanism, against nationalism, because nationalism is not an Islamic concept, it's a European, it's a Western concept. There is no nationalities in Islam. The distinction between people is by religious affiliation. You are either Muslim or infidel, or Ahl al-Kitab, or believing in one book, but it's not on nationality. And it became anti-American and anti-Israeli. All of a sudden, America turned to be the great Satan, and the slogans referring to Israel is Israel should be eliminated and destroyed. So I always wonder why they have to say that Israel should be eliminated and destroyed. If it's been eliminated, what remains to be destroyed? That's to make sure that it's dead and buried. But this is the slogan, Israel should be eliminated and destroyed. As I said, with the foundation of the State of Israel, we had started good relations. Israel was seeking to be recognized in the Middle East, while the Arab countries, the center around Israel, were unwilling to accept the existence of a Jewish state. Israeli leaders, led by the first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, came with this idea of the doctrine of the periphery. If we don't have good relations with our neighbors, let's create relations with the neighbors of the neighbors. Well, in a way, I could say also, if we don't have relations with our enemies, let's have relations with the enemies of our enemies. But this was the common ground between Israel and the countries of the periphery. There were three. One of them we'll put aside, we don't discuss it today, Ethiopia. But the other two are Turkey and Iran. Both of them are Muslim, but not Arab. Turkey is Muslim Sunni, Iran is Muslim Shiite. So the Iranians, not only they are not Arab, they also are not, they do not belong to the mainstream, the majority of the Muslim world Shiite. And the relations started, recognition first was Turkey, second Iran in 1949, and gradually relations became very firm and very close. The Shah, on his side, wanted Israel. He viewed Israel as a young country, powerful, defeating its enemies in 1948, later on 56. Later on also, but I think these are the formative years of his idea. He saw Israel as a good model for a nation state for Iran, because it was a Jewish state, by definition religious state, but not run by religious people. As a secularist, it was for him the good model to follow. He also had problems with Arab countries, and he thought that as long as he is having good relations with the Arabs, and as long as he is having good relations with Israel, and Israel is fighting the Arabs will not fight with him. And he was right. A year after a year after the emergence of the Arab or the emergence of the Islamic regime, or a bit after the peace between Israel and Egypt, there was Iran-Iraq war. They finished with the Israelis, they started with Iran. It's coincidence, but still, for him, there is someone else who is fighting. And we had also shared interest with the Kurdish people to help them and others. And I would say something, we have to be careful. I think in a way, the Shah overestimated the power of the Jews in America. And he wished, therefore, to be friendly with the Israelis. I refer you to a wonderful interview, not wonderful, it's devastating, what he said to Mark Wallace from the NBC many years ago, before the revolution. It was really devastating, the way he believed, basically, in the power of the Jews to help him. And in fact, in many ways, he came to Israel and said, you controlled the media, why they writing against us? Now, I imagine if they met the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister of Israel, say, why you allowed New York Times to write critical article against me, and the Prime Minister happens to be Abba Eban, I'm not sure that he says, oh, we don't have influence. So, well, let me go back and see how we can help. So, and he believed that they can do it, and we didn't let them know that we cannot. Unless we could, I don't know. I don't think we could. Now, but the relations were informal. There was no sign on the Israeli embassy. In fact, we didn't have Israeli embassy. It was a commercial mission in Iran, run at the time I was there by 3 wonderful diplomats that I wish any embassy of Israel having people like them. But for example, El Al, the Israeli airline, landed in Iran every day. But when you went to the airport to wait for a guest coming from Tel Aviv, it was not marked on the board. There is no flights, you know. There is no flag on the ambassador's car. And when I spoke with a friend at that time in the Foreign Ministry of Iran, why you don't move and have it formal? He explained in many ways, but he told me, you know what, from my experience, this is better to have relations of love without marriage contract is better. And that's what we have. So I don't yet have any such experience, so I cannot tell you what is better, but this was the situation. We didn't have any marriage contract, but we have good relations. All of a sudden, in 1979, everything collapsed. I must admit that the Israeli government has shown signs that they want to continue relations even after Khomeini's return. Israel did not return its diplomats from Iran when Khomeini came back and took power. What a better sign. Oh, unless they have been surprised and didn't have time to get their diplomats back. For me, the fact that they remained meant that they were willing to continue. And then during Iran-Iraq war, Israel helped Iran, sold arms to Iran, not in the way that I would have loved to see it, but I knew the people who negotiated, and they really were looking for channel to speak with the Iranians. And then it was messed with Iran-Contra and other issues. But for the Iranians, there was no way to bridge. Khomeini was stubborn man, very ideological. Now, moving to another side, let me raise 3 questions, although Mr. Brix thinks I am a political scientist, I was trained as an historian. So we ask questions, but we not put a title. But certainly we don't prophesize. That's one thing that I think we can agree. First is to what degree this revolution, Islamic revolution, was Islamic in its ideology. It is important, this revolution was not really an ideological, it was not an Islamic revolution. First of all, communists were part of it, Mujahideen al-Khalq were part of it, liberal intellectuals were part of it, all the professors of Tehran University with whom I lived 2 years were part of this revolutionary movement. The idea was not to change, to bring about Islamic Republic. And here's the root of the revolution, was to allow our children live in a better world. And I think, like many other revolutions in history, I think most revolutions in history, it has two basic goals: better welfare and greater freedom. If you ask me what is the goal of the revolution, in the eyes of the revolutionaries, I would say bread and freedom. 40 years after, there is no greater freedom in Iran there used to be under the Shah. Under the Shah, to speak or act against him was a crime. Today, to act or speak against the regime is a sin. I don't know which one of them is better. On the other thing, you think in terms of ideology, when you say, is there something that you can say, this is Islamic ideology? Well, Islam is everything. Islam covers, unlike Christianity in modern times, that is limited to some areas of belief and relations between Jew and the church and God. In Judaism and Islam, everything is religious. Even what we eat is influenced by our faith. How we are dressed is influenced by political system, social structure. Everything is religious. So if this is your concept, this is Islamic Revolution, because it was social, economic, political, cultural, anti-imperialist, combined everything together. But if you use Western terminology, this was much more than religious movement. And here it's important to note that there is no one interpretation of Islam. Because we don't have much time, I'll give you one sentence from an Iranian professor who was one of the radicals who closed the Iranian universities for 2 years in the early days of the revolution, faithful to Ayatollah Khomeini, and then returned from his support from Khomeini and now lives in the United States. Abdul Karim Soroush, who said, of course there is one Islam, but we don't live today according to what Islam used to be in the 7th century. We live today by our interpretation today of the principles of faith in the past. It's true for Judaism, for Christianity, for Islam. And it says the following sentence: there is no one interpretation of Islam. There is no one interpretation that is better than the other. There is no final interpretation of Islam. And very courageously, that made him leave the country, there can be no official interpretation of Islam. Namely in Islam, mainly in Shiite Islam, the thinkers, clerics, have the right to interpret or reinterpret the principles of faith and adapt the ideology, the doctrine, into the changing realities of life. It's no wonder that the Ayatollah number 1 in Iran in 1979, the highest ranking Ayatollah, went under house arrest under Islamic rule of Khomeini. It's no wonder that the man that Ayatollah Khomeini has chosen to be his successor, Ayatollah Montazeri, was removed from grace when he criticized the government killing of thousands of people without bringing them to court. He went under house arrest and spent the last years of his life under house arrest. The jails of Iran are full with clerics. So again, when you think about the ideology, we have to differentiate between different people with different doctrines. And today, the country in Iran is not ruled by the theologians. It was supposed to be the system of government in which theologians rule. The people who are in power in Iran, be Khamenei, Rouhani, and others, I would call them religious politicians. They are not high-ranking ayatollahs, but they are mid-level clerics, that their power is not due to their learning and knowledge in Islam, but because of their position in hierarchy of power. If you know Israel, I would say that we have the same thing that in our religious politicians like Rabbi Deri or Rabbi Gafni, which are totally different from Rabbi Ovadia Yosef or Rabbi Shah. This is the difference between theologians and people who are using religion as a profession. Now, going back to Iran. I paid my due to the civil society in Iran, I think. They are really very, very wonderful. But the power in Iran is in the hands of the other group, the radicals. And they have several advantages. First, they speak in the name of God, which is very powerful in traditional society. They wake up in the morning and say, this is the will of God. I don't know how they know, but in modern technology, maybe they have contact, they know, they get some messages. Second, there is the indoctrination. From first year in school, from the birth to the end of life, you are under indoctrination, explaining to you what is your duties in this life. And the third is these two don't help, you have suppression. And I heard people in America saying nothing succeeds like suppress, and it's true also in Iran, and they know the art of suppression, and you could see how they helped Bashar al-Assad to survive. Now, why there is no retreat from this? In many ways, the Islamic regime became much more pragmatic, almost in every way. Almost every area you could see some pragmatism in their policy. But the pragmatism is never that they volunteer to be pragmatic or moderate. When they are forced and they have to pay high price, they choose to be more pragmatic. The best example is after 8 years of war between Iran and Iraq, that Iran said war until victory. One day, Ayatollah Khomeini woke up, went to the television, looked at the face of the people, or they looked at him, and he said, we promised to fight until victory, and it's bitter to me to sign an agreement with Saddam Hussein. It's bitter than drinking poison, and it became very known in Iran that Ayatollah Khomeini had to drink this poison of signing an agreement with Saddam Hussein. Why? They didn't have a choice. I want to say that in the case of Israel, there is no contradiction between their ideological interest and their actual pragmatic policy or interest. For them, Judaism is religion, it's not nationality. Jews do not have the right to have a state of themselves, certainly not in Palestine, of course not with Jerusalem as its capital. The conflict is not political, it's not over territory, it's ideological, religious. It's a conflict between the good and bad, and the Zoroastrian Iranians know this conflict, the good and bad. One of them should be eliminated for the other one to survive. They also identify with the Palestinian issue. They also hold against Israel its good relations with the Shah, its good relations with the United States. I don't honestly know if they hate Israel because of its relations with the United States or hate America because of its relations with Israel. But for them, it's the two sides of the same coin. There is another point. Intellectually speaking, the existence of the Jewish state of Israel face Muslims with a major dilemma. Jews can live as a tolerated minority in a Muslim society. But there has never been a situation in which Muslims lived under Jewish control. I mean, intellectually, I think this is a major issue. How we can tolerate, after 1948, so many Jews living in Israel, and even more so after 1967. So the result is clear. Now, why they can continue with it? Because in a way, I don't want to be cynical, it's good for them. It's good because there is a way to divert public opinion to far away enemy. It always, for revolution, it is good that you have an enemy far away, your far abroad enemy. You know it from other places. It's also good to divert public opinion from their misery at home, to blame someone for all these misfortunes, and cynically using it to continue the animosity. I said in some phrase in Germany, I was speaking about their cynical interest in continuing this conflict with Israel, and I even say that if there was no Jewish state, it was good for the Islamic Republic to establish the Jewish state of Israel, so that they have enemy that they can fight with. So there was someone from the Arab League there, and he said, after hearing me, he said, you know, while you spoke about Iran with this interest, I kept thinking that you are speaking about Israel. So in a way, maybe he's also right. We also use this, but I think that we'll come to it. We have better reasons to fear from Iran. There are people in Iran who are against this policy. You know, Iranians don't wake up in the morning and ask themselves, well, what can I do today to destroy the Jewish state of Israel? Believe me, that's not the case for the vast majority of the Iranian people. We could see it in demonstrations recently. Slogans were, why should I care about Gaza and Lebanon? My life is dedicated to Iran. There is a professor at Tehran University, very courageous one. He went public saying that I, as one, recognize the state of Israel because it's a fact. Now, to say it's from Tehran University, well, he already been sentenced to 4 years in jail, which is good. It's not too bad. It's not good. It's not too bad and it's because of his revolutionary credentials. And I'm speaking about revolutionaries, not about the opposition, not about Mujahideen al-Khalq, not about the royalists, people who have been part and parcel of this revolution. And they force people, when they enter offices, to walk on the Israeli and American flags. You may have seen this man. You Google and you will see that he's pushing people aside, careful not to step on the Israeli flag. So there are such people. But again, power is in the hands of the others. They can change the policy that so far they don't want. Basically, if I ask myself, who made Iran such a big power? Because Iran is today a big power in the Middle East. You know who made the greatest services to the national interest of Iran? United States of America, whom they call the Great Satan. In 1991, American-led coalition crushed the military power of Saddam Hussein. In 2000, the big enemy of Iran on their west. 2002, American-led coalition removed the Taliban, the enemy number 2 of Iran. 2003, they returned and removed Saddam Hussein. If you remove the 2 big enemies of Iran, so what do you expect? Of course, they fill the vacuum. They are smart. They have history of running state. You know, Iran is a country that started with chess, you know, this game to play with it, chess. And they are also known for weaving carpets. I think if you have these qualities, you are a good politician. Maybe you can start teaching it here. Because when we chase, you look at the big picture. We look at the strategy. When you're weaving a carpet, you think at every dot. So they have this ability. And people think that the clerics are not good politicians. I don't think you think like this, but we are wrong. They are good politicians. And they know how to fish in muddy water. Where is the success of Iran? That's not because of the revolution. That's either America did the services, or the regime, something collapsed. Where is the success? One is in Lebanon, because of the wars in Lebanon and the collapse of the central government. In Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen. None of them is initiated by Iran, but Iran took advantage of it. Iran knows how to take advantage. With the war against Daesh, they started good relations with Russia. They brought Russia to Syria. They allowed Russian military airplanes to land in Iran. You know what this means for the Iranians? How proud they are of their sovereignty on their country to allow military airplanes of Russians to land in Iran. It took only 24 hours. They had to cancel it. The government could not resist the opposition from their own people. And by the way, the Russians are not the favorites of the Iranians. America has never taken any inch of Iranian territory. With Russia, they have a long history of territories that they lost to the Russians. But with the war, and I mentioned few services that America did to Iran. The big service is the nuclear deal. It is the most important gift given to the Iranians. Now, I must make clear, I was not against the nuclear deal. I'm not that happy with the withdrawal from the nuclear deal. But the deal was not good, because it dealt with one issue, the nuclear. The problem that I see from Iran, it's not that much the nuclear as it is missiles, its expansionist policy, its adventures beyond the borders, and all this was not dealt with by President Obama. Now, it was done intentionally, because first, the idea was you cannot solve all the problems. The time of Obama in office was limited. The days were numbered, so you have to rush and make this deal. And it was done but I think it was in expectation that Iran will change its policy. This was a golden opportunity to pressure Iran, because this was the time that there was a transatlantic alliance. Europe is important. Europe is important to Iran more than anywhere else, more than, I think, China or any other. They trust Europeans, and they need the Europeans. And the Europeans today are by and large with them. So they want to keep it. And now, after the revolution, just the days after the deal, the days the deal was signed, Ayatollah Khamenei makes public and put on his website, there is some slides that put it, but we forget it. It's the Iron Fist, showing how we smash the military power of America. He goes public saying that the cold death to America is not going to change regardless of the nuclear deal, because this is part of the DNA of the Islamic Revolution. Come on, you are making deal with the Americans with 5+1. Stop for a moment. 2 days before the implementation day, which was early January, I think, 2016. Iranians caught American sailors in the Gulf and humiliated them publicly, showing an American soldier's officer crying on camera because they've taken his cell phone from him. Okay, if you did a deal, why you have to go that far humiliating the other side? You need respect. Give respect to the others. They have recently started speaking about themselves as, well, the terminology is difficult to explain for people who don't know Islamic history. al-Qura. al-Qura is the mother of all the cities, which usually is referring to Mecca. And the philosophy says that wherever a country is recognized as the citadel of Islam, it's the duty of all Muslims to come and help them, even against their own countries. This philosophy you spread all over. You want Egyptians to love you, or Saudis? And they speak also about the Iranian Empire. They want to go back to the days of Cyrus the Great. And they say publicly, we control 4 capitals: Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut, Sana'a. So this is antagonizing the other countries. Now, I want to end with a few words about Israel, and I have 10 minutes or not?
Maximum.
No?
Maximum.
5? Maximum? No, that will be more than maximum. What is the problem of Israel with this nuclear deal? And what is the obsession of Israel with the Iranians? This combination of radical ideology and weapon of mass destruction is the most devastating scenario for Israelis. There is also another problem, is the Islamization of the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's always better to fight with national entities than with crusaders or any national or ideological religious movements. Its missile program, its aspiration for hegemony in the region, support for proxy movements, and the very fact that they came close to the Israeli border today. There are other reasons, probably. It's useful for some people in politics to make this issue bigger than it is, and to come with these slogans that I don't like, that Iran is an existential threat. I didn't accept this, you know. It's even not smart to say that Iran is presenting existential threat to Israel. And people ask me, so what you would say? I say, I'll tell them the truth. Israel is indestructible. What is the Prime Minister have said that Iran is an existential threat? What is the message to my children? That Iran is nuclear, so you have to leave the country? Or you're stupid? I conducted a survey of public opinion in Tel Aviv University on this issue in 2006 already. And we asked students, what would you do if Iran will be nuclear? 1 out of 4 people responded, which will consider seriously leaving the country. And it was the message to Iran, that we are sitting at home and frightened that you will eliminate, destroy us. I don't think. I believe I was the first one who also challenged the Prime Minister on this issue, equating Iran with Nazi Germany. It was in 2009, in the conference of the Jewish Federations in North America, in Los Angeles. He came there, he's a brilliant speaker. And he's also a good diplomat and very, very capable man. And he started, all his talk was, ladies and gentlemen, the year is 1938 and Iran is Germany. I had the misfortune to appear in the session after him, together with his chief of his office, Professor Uzi Arad, who is now not in good terms with the Prime Minister. And I started my talk saying, ladies and gentlemen, the year is not 1938 and Iran is not Germany. For one thing, not that Ahmadinejad is nice, he was the president. Ahmadinejad is a cruel man. But it doesn't serve Jewish interest to refer to everyone that we don't like as Hitler. In my lifetime, I know I'm very old, Nasser was Hitler, Arafat was Hitler, Saddam was Hitler, Gaddafi was Hitler, now Ahmadinejad is Hitler. What I'm going to tell my children? What was so bad about Hitler that every generation you have 5 Hitlers? No, I'm not kidding. I'm very serious. All the family of my wife have been eliminated in this Holocaust. Just because of this, we should put the Holocaust on shelf not referring to it. And what I said at that time. So leave the Holocaust. I would not compare anything in history with the Holocaust, even if it's useful for me for some reasons. So we did mistake. We speak so much. Even the professors in Israel speak very much, as you can see. And in the final, so I think that we committed mistakes. And there is the golden gift given to our government is President Trump. And what I can say, today there is escalation in the Gulf. If you ask me, I don't think both sides, Trump or Khamenei, want war. But people who follow history know that wars begin even when the both sides don't want it. We have World War I. We had the war in '67. No one wants the '67 war. It's happened. This is going, if this happens, and I hope very much that it won't happen, it will going to have devastating consequences for the entire region and beyond. But honestly, I'm more Israeli patriotic in this issue. What it's going to do to Israel. Imagine if there are casualties, and in wars there are casualties. Who would be blamed for inciting this war, if not Israel? So for us, it's important not to get involved. I would say another word here and there. Israel spoke about the military option, and I don't think that Israelis had military option attacking Iran. It is too big task for us. Some 14 years ago, I organized a discussion, meeting, seminar on this military option. And I invite two professors, but who cares about professors? Well, what do we know about these things? I invited two generals, one of them former commander of the Air Force, one of them former commander of the intelligence. I came back, and my wife asked me, so what did the generals say? Honestly, I don't remember what exactly did they say, but I tell you what I am taking from what they said, that Israel does not have military option. Because the commander of Air Force described how difficult it is to carry out such an attack now that they are prepared and waiting for you. It's not Iraq of 1981. And the chief of the intelligence said, what kind of intelligence you need to be able to attack precisely? So and I tell you, the leaders of Israeli, the heads of the Israeli security apparatus were by and large against Israeli military attack. So what I can say, I hope that the destiny of Iran would be left to the Iranian people, and they know exactly what is good for them. And I hope not to see, I cannot predict, but I only can hope not to see war in this sensitive region of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Menashri, for this very enlightening lecture. And I think it's fair to say that you are probably not only a professor, but also a magician, because when I heard you speak, you managed to talk about the mutual obsession without mentioning the word obsession, I think, for 40 minutes. And even more interestingly, you also managed to very long not talk about what probably most people would have expected, not to be the obsession or the key issue that the obsession is about, and that's the Iranian nuclear deal. So you came very late to that. And I think that one thing I take away from listening to you, but also to other colleagues working on the issue, is that this narrowing down of this one single issue leaves out so many aspects of the relation, and that might be not very healthy. And I think that was also a point of criticism that you had with the previous nuclear deal. I would have a lot of questions myself, but since we are already quite progressed in time, I would like to open up the floor to you. I would have, again, two comments. One comment is that, of course, here at the DA, we not only have freedom of speech, but also freedom after speech. But this said, this is not an invitation to give a small lecture by yourself, but if you ask a question, please try to be short and concise, so your colleagues here have also an opportunity to ask a question. And it would be very nice if you could also briefly mention your affiliation and your name, so that Professor Menashri knows whom to address the question to. So the floor will be open, and we have a microphone in the back, so please just indicate to me if you would have a question, and then we can get our discussions going. So who would like to give it a shot? Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, but I think that to clarify the situation, one should illustrate how strong the influence of Netanyahu personally and of pro-Israeli and pro-Likud circuits in America is to understand what's happening now.
Would you like to have a comment on that? Yeah.
You want to collect some? I said what I said about Israel. I cannot now take another 15 minutes to speak about the Israeli obsession. Certainly, there is an obsession on the parts of the government. But I'll tell you what is the problem. It is everyone wants everything to be balanced. And I am aware of it that Israel, they say that Israel has nuclear weapon. And it's very difficult for a country that has nuclear weapon to say against someone else who doesn't have nuclear weapon. But if Israel has nuclear weapon, it is probably because of the fact that no country in the Middle East is willing, or today we have two countries that have peace with Israel, to recognize the right of Israel to exist. No one recognizes the right of Israel to exist. I'm not proud of it, but this is the fact. Even countries who have peace with Israel don't recognize the right of Israel to exist. They recognize the existence of the state of Israel. And in 1973, Israel was attacked simultaneously by Egyptians and Syrians. At that time, our legendary defense minister said that we are approaching the fall of the third temple. In other words, it might be the end of the state of Israel. Israel did not use nuclear weapon. So when it's going to use it? But when you have a president like Ahmadinejad, and I would urge you to Google Ahmadinejad, when he was, the Iranian presidents will never miss an opportunity to visit New York. It's a great Saturn, but it's good to be there. And they have one opportunity a year, basically, to be in New York. And this is with the General Assembly. And so far, all the presidents of Iran have been in the General Assembly every year. The first time that Ahmadinejad went to New York, to General Assembly, he spoke, he said 27 minutes. And he went back, he was sitting on the floor with an Ayatollah who asked him about his experience in New York. And he said, I spoke for 27 minutes, all eyes were glued to me, no one said a word, but this, he said, was because there was an aura of light above my head with God protection. Well, I have also light here, but mine is different. A leader of a state, a president of the state who speaks like this should not get close to nuclear battle. So it's not a question of, now I don't know, I cannot say if Iran has nuclear weapon, they will use it, they will not use it, but I think the very possession is problematic. And this is part of the obsession that we have. Now speak about what the Shah spoke about Jews in America. He was speaking about AIPAC, he was speaking about the organized Jewish community with their power. When I speak about obsession, is that, or interest to go to America, let me say about Prime Minister of Israel in 2015, going to America to speak at the Congress behind the back of a sitting president. This was bad in itself. Then the impact is that we managed to make the support for Israel from a bipartisan agreement of both Republicans and Democrats, it turned to be a kind of Republicans in Israel. What we will do in the next few years when there is another president? And the president goes, and the prime minister goes to Washington to speak. He mentioned one episode of the life of Jews in Iran. There is a history of over 2,000 years, 2,500 years of Jewish life in Iran. He mentioned one episode in which they wanted to kill the Jews, and the Jews managed and killed them all. I said, come on, why you have to mention this? There are so many splendid items that we had in common, living together. So I went to one of his advisors, and I asked a simple question. Who reads the lectures or the speeches of the prime minister before he delivers them? The answer was obvious, no one. No one. But she said, why you are asking? I said, because why he mentioned this episode, why he could mention Cyrus the Great. So, well, this was close to this holiday that we celebrate Purim on this occasion. So, well, this month, the government of Israel issued a stamp to honor Cyrus the Great. And I was asked, really? So I wanted to go and ask someone else about this, and then I was afraid that he will ask me, who is Cyrus the Great? So when you speak with the Iranians, they say, well, this is conspiracy of the Israelis to issue a stamp to speak to our people against their government. The government didn't use these things. We could have used better examples to show times of coexistence, and there have been times of difficulties. And by the way, the government of Iran today is fair to the Jews. I'll stop here. I didn't know if I answered the question, but...
There was a second question here. Would we have some other questions to collect?
Thank you very much. My name is Wolfgang Benedek. I'm a professor of international law from University of Graz. Thank you very much for your analysis, which I found very interesting. My question would go indeed to the contemporary history. I think this mutual obsession pays off for both sides because you have a solid enemy on the other side and you can capitalize politically on this. And I can also understand that Netanyahu during the elections and so on was using this even more than before. But what was, in your view, the reason for the American change of policy? Some people say Trump wanted to do a favor to Netanyahu, but I think that the Americans were thinking about their own interest than just about Israel. And from a European side, it is very difficult to understand what should be the purpose of this recent acceleration of events, building up a big threat, which, to the best knowledge of everybody involved, does not exist. Nothing has changed dramatically which merits this kind of response, except if you want to use this for any other purposes. And if I think back, we had a situation in Iran, and you also made this distinction, where the hardliners were already in a bad shape. People were protesting in large numbers on the streets because the economic and social conditions were worsening a lot. So this nuclear deal was an opportunity to strengthen also the moderates and also to give them a different approach for the future, where they would not be threatened so much, where this nuclear option would not be so important anymore. Now they are back to rallying around the hardliners. Now they are back to maybe having a good reason to go nuclear again. Who gains from all that? Thank you.
Right. There was a second question here, the gentleman in the back.
Pushkal Chaparwal, I'm in the private sector and also an alumni of the DA. Thank you so much, Professor, for your very enlightening talk. My question relates to, in your opinion, how much of an importance does pre-Islamic history of Iran has in the current government? Because on one hand, you have Foreign Minister Zarif praising Cyrus and Xerxes and Darius. On the other hand, there have also been statements where the regime sort of disowns this history because they were non-Muslims. So I'd like to get your opinion on that. Thank you.
All right. Do we have another question, or should we take it from here? All right. So I think those two would be the next questions.
Well, I'll go back to the gentleman from Italy. I appeared with many Iranians on the same stage. And I think that we're meeting with intellectuals from Iran, we don't have any disagreement, almost any disagreement. Sometimes they are more critical than me on Iran. And some of this meeting is due to an organization that is based in Italy, Pagwash. You probably know, you're a diplomat. Okay. So it's not only Pagwash, there are other organizations that have tracked 2 meetings, and it's very useful. The problem is that in most cases, Iranians are frightened to meet, to come on the same stage with Israelis. I am having 2 classes here. One of them deals with Iran and Israel. And I had an assignment for the students to represent both sides in a debate. Some of them are sitting here. I wished I could invite the ambassador of Israel and the ambassador of Iran to lead this discussion. So that's beyond, can you do it? I don't mind not to be there. I don't mind if they do it one after the other. It doesn't matter. But we have to speak with each other. It is right that this policy strengthens the radicals. Well, they are strong enough anyway. The people who really control Iran, and because of Trump's policy, they say, okay, we didn't accept that we should negotiate with the Americans. The president wanted, with Zarif, we allowed them to do it. But what is the result? We knew they will cheat you. We knew, I said words that they are saying, that you cannot trust the Americans. They will stab you in the back. Now, after this happened, they said, see how lucky we are that we didn't trust you and we continued our activities in the region. Imagine if we were not doing it, how weak we would have been. Because they continued. They didn't stop all this. And I don't know about the nuclear issue. I trust the IAEA that they stopped. But they can go back and do continue their plans. Your question, this gentleman, private sector, you say? Oh, there are good questions from the private sector. You touch upon something which is very critical in the history, looking at the history of Iran. The history of Iran is based on two major pillars in the last 100 years. One is, I would call, the tradition of Cyrus the Great, Persian culture, Iranian civilization, history, Persepolis, but it comes today with Westernization also, and the tradition of, I would say, Imam Hussein or the Prophet Muhammad. These are the two pillars. And the controversy between the Shah and Khomeini are based on this issue. The Shah was sticking to the monarchy, to Persian culture, the Khomeini on Islam or Shiite Islam. In the last 2 centuries, there is another pillar, which is Western civilization. Now, people ask if you can, the West can go back to Iran. My dear friends, there is no way you can take the West out of Iran. America is there. The people of Iran adore the United States. One of the hostages in the American embassy in the early days of the revolution told me that at that time there were graffitis on the walls of the American embassy. And in one of them was written, "Yankees go home." And someone wrote in Persian under it, "And take me with you." So this is how much they hate America. That's not that the people are against the United States, and the culture is there. You know, they go to the streets and say, "Death to America, death to America." And when they are thirsty, they drink, I don't know, Pepsi Cola probably. Coca-Cola is not popular in the Middle East. But they teach English as a foreign language. So we have this control. So Iran is not exactly what you see. How can I explain it? I can maybe tell you a story of what I heard from the Iranians. Is this still recording? It's bad. The freedom of speech in the West is limited by these politically correct and all these issues. The story of an Iranian who lived long time in the West came back to Iran, and wandering the street of Tehran, he asked his friend, "Tell me, where can I buy cigarettes?" The Iranians are heavy smokers, more than the Austrians. So, well, you want to buy cigarettes? Let me take you to the mosque, alluding that the mosque became place for business. So, well, mosque is not place for business or buying cigarettes. The mosque is place for prayer. Well, you want place for prayer? Let me take you to Tehran University, when the weekly Friday sermons are being held from the mosque in the Tehran University. So, university is not place for prayer. University is place for intellectuals. So, well, you want the intellectuals, so let me take you to the jail of Wien. You will meet them there. Then you say, but jail is not place for intellectuals, it's place for criminals. So, if you want to the criminals, let me take you, you know where. So it's different than what you see. And honestly, you know, I'm studying Iran 50 years now. And I tell you, the more I learn, the less I understand. These conflicts exist. Now, at the early days of the revolution, there was an Ayatollah who sent bulldozers to destroy the ruins of Persepolis. He was stopped by another Ayatollah. And you can see these two Ayatollahs, one wants to destroy and the one... Now, presidents of Iran pay visit to Persepolis. Even Ahmadinejad. So, not only, I learned in my old age that not only people get mature, but also revolutions get mature. And they come to terms with realities. They teach poetry. They teach Hafez. Hafez writes about women and wine. But it's still, you cannot take Hafez from the soul of the people. You cannot take Ferdowsi, even his book is the Book of Kings, and you don't like the kings. So they have to have compromise. Unfortunately, on the issue of the United States and Israel, these are the two main issues that there is no change. And I try to understand it because They've withdrawn from so many other principles, and they've left with two flags: anti-Americanism, anti-Israel. If you are a revolution and you left only with two items, what would wisdom dictate? To raise them higher or to put them down? Right now, the current government in Iran is raising them up. If there will be someone else, and there are, again, none of the former presidents of Iran is a persona grata in Iran today. I mean, all the presidents after Khamenei, he was the third. The first is in exile. He was impeached and left the country in Bani Sadr. The second was assassinated shortly after his election. Khamenei was the first one for 8 years. After him was Rafsanjani, Khatami, Ahmadinejad, and Rouhani. The three others wanted to run for office, for presidency, when it was allowed, possible constitutionally, and they didn't accept their candidacy. The children of Rafsanjani are in jail or going in and out. So the two leaders of the Green Movement, the former Prime Minister Mousavi and the former Chairman of Parliament Karoubi, are 8 years now under house arrest. So this is what we see in Iran, that the president is president. When he is out, he is out. You cannot mention the name of President Khatami, the most liberal, or the only liberal president that Iran had. You cannot mention his name publicly. His name cannot appear on newspapers, certainly not his picture. So that's the life in Iran. Now, I want to conclude, but because people ask what will be. The Iranians have history of revolutions. They had 4 mass movements in the last 140 years. Iran is the only country in the Middle East which had 2 big revolutions in the 20th century. One in 1906, the Constitutional Revolution, and one in 1979, the Islamic Revolution. In between, you had Mossadegh. In between, you had the Green Movement and others. A country with such a tradition, and all of them have been mass movements. One day, you can trust me, the young people of Iran will decide where to go. At this stage, what we see in Iran, again, I'll tell you from what I read. I'm learning always from my students, but in this case also from Iranian students. There was an article in Iranian newspaper some years ago, and an Ayatollah approached the young people, the youth, and threatening them not to deviate from true Islam, to be faithful of true Islam, and not to cross red lines. A young student, whom I don't know, maybe he's not that young anymore, wrote back a week after. The article said that, you tell us not to cross red lines, not to do A, B, and C. We are young and we want to have a good life. You preach us not to cross red lines, but please tell us, who decides what are the red lines for us not to cross? And he ended, the punchline was at the end. The problem is not that we, the young students, are crossing red lines which we don't know what they are and who decide. But the problem is that you, the radical clerics, in a one-way street, you are driving against the flow of traffic. And that's the picture that I see in Iran. The majority of the people want to breathe. And in front of them, there is the government, which is all machinery. As an historian, I don't know when this will happen. When this will happen, our friends for political science will tell you, I knew exactly what will happen. Don't believe them, because no one knows in history how the things develop. The Intifada with the Palestinians in 1987 started because of car accident. This was not the cause. This was triggered, the Intifada. So I think that the young people of Iran can decide, and I think that if foreign country calls them to do this, it doesn't help them, it may delay the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think from these extensive answers, it got clear that Professor Menashri really is a historian. I think historians, they write more books than political scientists' articles. But I hope you could take many things away from these questions and answers. And just one thing, the format is a lecture, so it's not a round table where it involves several participants, and that also should explain the format, but I appreciate the question to embed the talk into a comprehensive perspective. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and we wish you all a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you.